Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog. For today's subject, that's pretty obvious what today's subject is going to be. It's going to be the impeachment so-called hearings that started today in the House. It started at 10 a.m. today. It only finished a little while ago, around 2:30. There's no way that I, with a day job, can go through the whole shebang and give you a line-by-line readout of my impressions. So I'm just going to bring out a couple of highlights, or a few highlights, things that I noticed that, well, we have a biased media, so things that at least people in the mainstream media, reporters, may not mention. But first I want to start out with a tweet from Ronna McDaniel. She's the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee. She put out an interesting tweet here. Now, take into consideration that this is from their own internal polling, but take it for what it's worth. I'll put up the tweet and I'll read you what she says, and I'm also going to link to an article in Red State that discusses in more detail if you want to get the details, but she really sums it up pretty well. We've been polling our 2020 target states each week, and since Pelosi's charade started, Donald Trump's approval is up. Opposition to hearings among Democrats is up 6 points. Biden's unfavorability is up 10 points. Americans are not buying the attacks on POTUS, President of the United States. Okay, that last part is a conclusion that she's reaching. I guess you call that puffery. But the first 3 points, I'll assume that's what they're finding in their polling. Otherwise, why go through the trouble of putting this out, this tweet? So getting back to the opposition to hearings among Democrats is up 6 points. After today's hearings, it would not surprise me if that opposition went up even more. And I'm wondering about independents, how they feel about it, because it's obvious. The two witnesses, George Kent and Bill Taylor, gave, well, especially Taylor, this very long opening statement. It's very clear from their statements that their main problem is not something that Trump has done that is impeachable. They just didn't agree with his foreign policy, specifically holding up military aid to Ukraine, even though, and this is a question I would have wanted, my own observation, would have wanted to have heard asked, and nobody asked it, that as the Republicans brought up this military aid that Trump gave, Obama never did. He just sent MREs, meals ready to eat, blankets, in other words, humanitarian aid. He did not send military aid. Trump did that. It also came out, it bears remembering, that the withheld aid that was eventually given, the military aid, that was a second tranche of 2 tranches in which the first installment of military aid, specifically Javelin missiles, had been given months before this July 25th phone call that the Democrats are using as, I'll use the word pretext, as a pretext to impeach President Trump. Now, the Republicans went through a litany of all the witnesses that they wanted to call that they were not allowed to call, questions they would like to ask that they were not allowed to ask, though they were able to make the case that Trump was investigating corruption, that was his purpose in the calls. I was concerned that they would not be allowed to make that point, but they did, and they made it repeatedly, so that was good, and that was one impression that I got. But the one that especially got me was Bill Taylor especially made this point that he was not there for any particular purpose. He wasn't trying to impeach the president. He made that point repeatedly, but at the very end, Schiff asked each witness if they believed that Trump withheld the aid for personal political gain, and they both answered unequivocally Yes. So to me, so much for, well, we're just giving you the facts, we're impartial, we don't have any conclusions. That's nonsense. The question I would have asked had I been on that committee was, all right, you just said that you believe that Trump withheld the aid for his personal political benefit. When did you reach that conclusion? Did you reach it just now during these hearings when you're just repeating your own testimony? Or did you arrive at that conclusion before these hearings even started? The hearings are intended to determine whether Trump used the withholding of the military aid for his personal political benefit. That was the purpose of the hearings, whether that was in fact what he did. But you're saying that you already reached that conclusion yourself, and you are now giving that conclusion before the hearings have even concluded. These hearings, by the way, in which the Republicans are not going to be allowed to call certain witnesses that they want to call. That, to me, was a very telling moment. It's going to be interesting to me as I follow the news and the commentary after today, whether anybody else picks up on that, because it just stuck out like the proverbial sore thumb to me. Now, another point that a Republican representative made, I don't remember which representative it was, but it's a very good point, in my opinion. The withholding of the aid, according to Trump, was in order to determine whether Zelensky would be different from the previous president, Poroshenko of the Ukraine. I keep saying the Ukraine. You're supposed to say Ukraine now. When it was part of Russia, they would call it the Ukraine. If I slip into that, just bear with me. Ukraine, the previous president of Ukraine, was corrupt. Trump wanted to make sure that that would not be the case under the new president. The Democrats are claiming that the aid was withheld until an article in Politico that discussed the aid being withheld. And, well, I won't go into the whole story again, but the reason for the impeachment inquiry. But as somebody pointed out, the aid was also released after some combination of senators and administration officials. I think a certain number of senators, and then I think Pompeo, I think Bolton was involved, assured Trump that Zelensky was different. But there's another factor that comes into the equation, and I did not know this. Now, we all know about that one-on-one meeting between Trump and Zelensky when Zelensky said that he was not under any pressure. He's actually said that many times, not just in that one meeting with Trump, but he said it in Japan, he said it in a number of countries, in interviews, press conferences. He said many times, on many occasions since then, that he did not know that aid was being withheld. He felt under no pressure. So the question that one of the Republican representatives raised, and it was unfortunate, I thought, that it came at the end of 5 minutes. They were all given 5-minute windows in which to ask questions. So it came near the end when this was asked, and nobody came back to it to clarify it, to say it at the beginning of a 5-minute period of questioning to make sure that the point was understood, heard, reinforced. But if Zelensky is on the up and up, and if he's honest, if we are supposed to take Zelensky at his word, don't we also have to take him at his word when he said he was not being pressured? That is an important point, because if Zelensky was lying about that, then he's corrupt. He could be lying about any number of things. So you see the contradiction there, why the two things are mutually exclusive. I just am disappointed that that was not hammered more than it was. As I said, it just came at almost as an afterthought at the end of a particular 5-minute question segment. But to me, that is important. Another good point was made by Jim Jordan. You remember when you were a kid, a game called Telephone, where several kids would sit in a circle or stand in a line, sit in a line. One kid would whisper something to the next kid over, who would whisper the same thing to the next kid over, so on and so forth, till it gets to the last person. And it turns out that it was not the same thing being whispered from one to the other, because as each person heard the previous person's comment and then moved to the next person, whispered to the next person, the message would change. As Jim Jordan pointed out, Bill Taylor's testimony was he heard, it's a long list, I can't remember the whole list, but it was Bill Taylor heard from one person who heard from another person who heard from another person who heard from another person. It was a chain of around 5 or 6 people. So Jim Jordan asked the obvious question: is it possible that what Bill Taylor heard from the person who spoke to him, after these numerous previous layers between Bill Taylor and the President of the United States, is it possible that what Bill Taylor heard was wrong, was not necessarily what the President said? All Bill Taylor could reply, well, this is what I heard. Jim Jordan said, yes, that is what you heard, but is it not possible that it could be wrong because of the President told this person, who told this person, who told this person, who told this person before it got to you, Bill Taylor? And then Jim Jordan made the more poignant point. This is the Democrat star witness. Bill Taylor is the Democrat star witness, testifying to something that he heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from the President. One last point I want to make is that one of the Democratic questioners asked in that July 25th phone call, was the word corruption or corrupt mentioned? And it wasn't. Those words did not appear. Trump was asking for specific investigations of specific incidents. But is that not one way to demonstrate whether Zelensky and the people he has now brought into his administration, whether they are honest or corrupt? Not by getting a general promise to investigate corruption, but here are some specific cases. Will you commit? Promise to investigate those. Another point that a Democratic questioner made was about asking, well, it was made repeatedly by the Democrats, about Trump's insisting that Zelensky make a public promise, a public commitment to these investigations. They were claiming this to be an indication of the quid pro quo, which they don't use anymore. Now they say bribery and extortion, because apparently quid pro quo, that's Latin, you know, is too hard for us idiots in flyover country to understand. But I think everybody knows what a quid pro quo is. Another problem I think they're having is that there is no quid pro quo. They could not find any. So now they're talking about extortion and bribery. I don't know what they'll come up with tomorrow, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn that they came up with something else, another narrative to pile on top of the narratives that they've been promulgating so far. But if I'm the President of the United States and I'm dealing with a country with a reputation for corruption, and a new president commits privately to investigate particular instances of potential corruption, how do I get a further assurance? Is it enough for a president to make a commitment privately? What additional assurance can we get? And I would think an obvious one would be make your promise public. Go on the record. Let the world hear what you committed to do. That's especially important if the new president does not keep the commitment. Then we may want to withhold additional aid. So if you're going to do that and you're going to get pushback from diplomats such as Bill Taylor, one of the witnesses today, but it looks like a lot of people in the State Department, if a president is going to get pushback on withholding future aid, it's a good idea, I would think, to have the president of Ukraine on public record committing to pursue these instances of potential corruption. So if they don't do it, you have that promise that he was going to do it, and it's a public promise. So I wish that somebody at these hearings had raised that issue. Nobody did. I'm disappointed. I guess you could say I'm disappointed that I was not on that panel. So you all have to vote for me for representative from Cordova, Tennessee, whatever, I think it's the 8th district. Well, if the current guy retires, because as far as I know, he's doing a very good job, but maybe he should put me on his staff so that I can bring up these questions to ask. So let me see here. Oh, well, Schiff, in his opening statement, he made clear that he had already reached his own conclusion. So why are we even holding these hearings? It's just to support his already created narrative and his predetermined verdict and determination already made to send articles of impeachment to the Senate. I'm looking forward to see what happens there. I have one last point that a Republican congressman made, an interesting question, because this gets to Biden having the prosecutor fired. The earlier prosecutor, I put the tape up in an earlier vlog, Biden saying, fire the prosecutor within 6 hours or you don't get the $1 billion. We all know he said that. Somebody asked, well, he set up the question by mentioning to Bill Taylor, with which Bill Taylor agreed, that there are hundreds, literally hundreds of corrupt countries in the world with whom we deal and sometimes give aid. There are hundreds of corrupt countries with whom we deal. Did Bill Taylor know of, could he cite a single other instance except for this one with Biden on tape in which an American official, a vice president, demanded the firing of a specific person in order to get aid? Bill Taylor answered, no, he did not. This has never happened before. It was a first-time occurrence with Biden, where you have a vice president of the United States demanding that a prosecutor be fired in order to get $1 billion in aid. A prosecutor who was looking into a company with a reputation for corruption in a country with a reputation for corruption, a company on whose board the vice president's son sat. That's it. Take it for what it's worth. I have a comment section below the video for you to put your own comments. I invite everybody to put their comments there, but don't do that right away. Before you do that, you must do this. Thumbs up if you like this video, and just as Trump did, there's no quid pro quo. You don't have to give me a thumbs up. I am not making a demand. I'm not going to give you, well, let's say one of my favorite candy bars. Well, it's my favorite candy bar, Kit Kat. You don't have to give me a thumbs up for a Kit Kat. Just in your honest opinion, if you like this video, then I'd appreciate a thumbs up if you can do it. And finally, come back and see me again. I look forward to seeing all of you again, perhaps with a few additional new people. And until I do see all of you again, bye.